Hi, I'm Chris Bone. I'm University of Nebraska-Lincoln School of Computing's Assistant Director for Capstone. I'd like to talk with you about a little experiment we tried in the 2020 to 21 academic year, in which instead of having our Capstone project sponsored by an external sponsor, so we still have most of them sponsored by external sponsors, but one of them, we tried having the students sponsor their own. So I'm going to talk to you about how that went, some of the lessons learned from it, things we could do to improve, and did improve in 2021 to 22. So this paper was written by Ethan Butte, one of the students on that team. Dr. Suzette Person, who is with the School of Computing, she is responsible for our undergraduate software engineering major, and then me, I'm responsible for our undergraduate capstone program. So the real question is, was this useful? Did the students learn? Now, spoiler alert, yes, they did. And we also learned from it as well. So some background first. Our software engineering major has only been around for a few years. Our computer science major, our computer engineering major, they've been around for a while. So let's start off by looking at their path to the capstone program, because the differences played into the success of our little experiment. So our CS majors, our CE majors, they have, it's a pretty typical introductory sequence: CS1, CS2, CS3, and then they have a dedicated software engineering course. And of course, they're taking all these other courses too. But as far as the prerequisite path to getting to the capstone, in principle, in theory, they can do it in their junior year. And some do. I'm not sure that was altogether wise, but the ability to get started in their junior year is a factor then that led to the design of our software engineering major. So our software engineering major, we required 2 years of capstone. So the novel feature of our software engineering major is it's a software engineering first. So they still learn CS1, CS2, CS3, but embedded in those courses, they're learning software engineering concepts along the way and practices. So very quickly, they're learning to use Git. That's easy. But they're also learning in their first semester, they're learning about quality attributes. They're learning about maintainable code. They may not be able to write very maintainable code yet, but they recognize the importance of it. They recognize the importance of good documentation and tests. We have them writing tests in that first semester. Okay, so they're learning software engineering from the start. In the fourth semester, principally they were learning some tools before this, but they learned additional software tooling. They also learned a lot of practices. And, some students have accused us of not teaching them practices until that fourth semester so that fewer students succeed because we don't have the capacity for more students. It's amazing what students will think. The reality is when that sequence was designed, they didn't think of introducing the practices, things like Agile earlier, but or never mind Agile, even waterfall. But the reality is, so that's part of the reality. The other reality is they really can appreciate just how valuable having a well-defined software engineering process is after having done a few projects without it. So anyways, but for the purposes of this paper, the important point is that in that fourth semester, they're doing a semester-long project. They're contributing to an open source project. The first few years they did OpenMRS. More recently, they're doing Pitivi. So that's their path to capstone. And then they start the capstone program. They're in their junior year, they do just regular capstone, just like our CS and CE majors. In fact, they're embedded right there with them. They also have this co-requisite for leadership and mentorship. In their second year, they move on to broaden their experiences. Now, we didn't want the second year capstone to be just a repeat of this, do the same as first year, just more of it. That wasn't what we wanted. They would learn a little bit from it, but not as much as we would like. So some students, to be sure, do almost a repeat of their first year, not with the same project. These are 1 year long projects, 2 semester projects. But Some students they need a little more polish. And so we get them, keep them in that development role. We call them process specialists because they've been through the process before, so they can share it with the rest of the team. We really encourage peer instruction here in the Capstone program, especially from the software engineering majors to the others. I mean, the CS majors, CE majors, they have a semester of software engineering. It's hopefully relatively recent before the Capstone, but still just one semester. The software engineering majors have been living and breathing software engineering the entire time in school. So we really encourage that peer instruction. So yeah, some students from their second year, yeah, you kind of do repeat it first, but mostly we try to encourage them to do other things. Well, not just encourage, we actually some of them nudge or assign them into other things. Maybe take on leadership roles. But to be sure, even in the first year, you can take on leadership roles. Otherwise, those CS and CE majors wouldn't have that opportunity. But you know, if you did, maybe for the software engineering majors, if you were in development last year, why don't you try a leadership role this year? Or you were in leadership role A last year, why don't you try leadership role B this year? Or we have some other things they could try. So a typical project is a 2-semester project. 5 to 6 students per team. That seems to be a really good mix. Fewer, not enough students. More, it's hard to keep all the cats herded. These days, a typical team is going to have a couple of software engineering students, probably one in their second year and one in their first year of Capstone. Not every team has a second year student, so some teams will have maybe a couple of first years. This year, we have a team that has 3 second year students, but that was for very deliberate reasons beyond the scope of this talk. And then, of course, CS majors, mostly CS majors, because that's what most of our projects are. We have some projects that are more interesting to computer engineering majors, so those obviously have computer engineering students on them. Our sponsors are paying sponsors. They help us pay the bills. We'll talk about what some of that buys us here in a moment. So maybe half are from industry, others from government. We have some nonprofits paid for by someone else. We have other departments in the university paying for us to do projects. We also have set aside some projects to be sponsored by our School of Computing faculty, so we don't charge for those. But we still don't let them do the grading. The grading is done set by someone other than the sponsor. In fact, what I have a team of, we call them the tribe leads, thanks to Spotify. We have the tribe leads who do the grading. The sponsors are not those tribe leads. So typical structure, you've got the student team, 5 or 6 students. Of those 5 or 6, one is a development manager, focus on the how. One is the product manager, focus on the what. And of those 2, one is also going to be the squad lead who helps set up meetings and that sort of thing. Support we provide them, obviously the faculty supervisor, not just grading, they also provide some just-in-time instruction and all that. We have a professional project manager. This is staff we hired from, they're not faculty, they're staff. We hired them from industry. One of our 2 is PMP. The other one, let's disclose, I've really encouraged her to finish it. But they bring years of project management experience with them. And now they're willing to be project managers for these student teams. And so, even though they're not faculty, they still provide some guidance and support and those pushing kind of the practical, well, not just as much practical, we provide some practical aspects too, but the working with people part of it. And the managerial aspects, they really help shape the teams. And we've seen great improvement in how the students perform since we brought them on. You obviously have a sponsor and volunteer coaches from industry. Now, these volunteer coaches, they help bring some of that technical expertise that we can't necessarily provide them. It's a mixed bag. Some of them are great, some of them are okay, some of them, well, they don't hurt. So you get what you get when you have volunteers. But for our second year students, we've got these other experiences. So some of the projects we've actually been able to work with the sponsor to find enough scope to actually justify putting 2 teams on the project. Okay, well, now we take a second year student, make them this multi-team lead where they're responsible for coordinating the actions of these 2 teams. Sometimes it's just one person as a multi-team lead. A couple times we've done a multi-team product manager and a multi-team architect. The point is, we can introduce this additional experience of coordinating the actions of multiple teams. We've also had some students who aren't even in their second year, who aren't even on a team. Some of them are learning the project management side of things. Some of them are learning QA. They already know QA, but now they have to experience with actually being responsible for helping out with QA. We expect students to do their own QA, but now we have some students who are helping out with that external QA. And then the softy startup. That's our experiment. Is, can they do a kind of a startup model and be responsible not for just for the technical aspect of this, but also the business aspect, making sure that it's actually worth building this thing. Now you'll notice we took away a lot of the support, and I'll explain why. So they don't have that project manager helping them anymore. Well, they obviously don't have a sponsor because they're the only sponsor, but we did get some additional coaching from industry, and not just what we get off from available volunteers. We actually went out and solicited very particular volunteer coaches. So how it started was we had one of those things that was going on, one of the many things that was going on in spring of 2020, was the NCAA said, hey, yeah, sure, student athletes can profit from appearances and profit from their likeness. And so Matt Sectorman here was one of our software engineering students, getting ready. He's wrapping up his first year at Capstone, and he says, hey, I've got this idea for an app where people who want one of these Husker athletes to make an appearance can contact an athlete, say, hey, are you available for such and such time? And the athlete, part of the athlete's profile will be, here's how much I charge per hour, whatever the model is. But it's kind of this way to hook up the athletes with people who want an athlete to make an appearance. And so, yeah, this is a great idea. So what do you say to a student who comes to you with this great idea? It's completely new, outside our comfort zone. And wow, yeah, well, maybe we can straight, but what do you tell a student in the middle of spring, well, approaching the end of spring 2020, when we've all scattered to the four winds, trying to figure out how to get through the rest of spring 2020, and how, my goodness gracious, how are we going to do fall of 2020? What do you tell a student when they come to you with a great idea? I'll think about it. And to be fair, we did have to think about it. We very quickly decided we wanted to do it. We just didn't know how. And so that's what we really had to think about. So what the students were bringing with us was 9 students. We originally told them 8, but they said, hey, we got one more person. If we could have one more person, I said, all right, sure. Turns out 9 was a little bit much. And kind of could almost see that. Well, our typical teams were 5 to 6 because that seemed to be a good size. Something else they brought. They worked closely together for the previous 3 years, this cohort model. So they knew each other. They already got past all that forming and the norming and the storming. They were ready to just get going and perform. They'd already worked on a 1-semester project. They'd already worked on a 1-year project. So they seemed primed for success. But what we didn't want to do was provide absolutely no support. And the reason why we were concerned about that was because I already knew what our university's IT policies were, because I looked them up when I said I was going to write a textbook. And the short version of it is that the bylaws for our university say that the intellectual property as it pertains to students is the same as it pertains to faculty, which is any work you do, yeah, sure, you own the intellectual property for it. But if you use significant university resources in the development of that intellectual property, and if you can commercialize it, then the university has an interest. And not just any interest, the university will actually claim entirety of it unless you have a different agreement. Now we have, for our external sponsors, we actually have an agreement in place for that sort of thing. All right, so we wanted to protect that aspect of it, because they wanted to commercialize this. So then we also didn't want to just throw them at it and minimize and have kind of no learning opportunity. We wanted to actually give them the ability to learn, to enable that learning, so that when they actually encountered that learning opportunity, they could experience it. We also didn't want to require additional coursework. We weren't going to just send them to College of Business and say, hey, take these 3 entrepreneurial courses before Capstone. No, especially with the timeline we're looking at. But we also weren't going to ask the College of Business to provide that support for outside of the courses, because then you're looking at increasing that use of university resources that would jeopardize their ownership of IP. So we worked with an industry partner. Don't Panic Labs, we already had very good familiarity with them. They have a very close relationship with us and us with them, obviously. And Don't Panic Labs formed as part of Nebraska Global, which is the idea of bringing nerds and money together. That's exactly how they put it. And so yeah, they do you can hire them to develop some product for you, and they pay a lot more than, or they charge a lot more than I do. But they also are focused on helping startups. So on the Nebraska Global side, there's the funding, but what the Panic Labs, what they contribute is kind of that helping the startups succeed in those early days. How do I know that what I'm going to build is the right thing? That sort of idea. And so Don't Panic Labs agreed to do that for our students for free. So we told our students, let's go for it. But you can't just start with the one idea, because if it turns out that's not viable, you don't have to start all over from scratch. So start with a total of 4 ideas. And then we set things up. And unfortunately, it took us a while to get started, because you remember fall 2020. So we were busy with many other things. And unfortunately, we couldn't get those meetings started as soon as possible. So we let them kind of rudderless for a little bit. We failed there. They quickly discarded one of the products. It wasn't that they didn't think it was nifty. It's just none of them wanted to work on it. So we said, all right, you get one freebie like that. If the remaining narrowing down to a final product, you have to use data-driven decisions. So they met with Don't Panic Labs, had a few meetings with Don't Panic Labs. They did some market analysis, and then they were able to discard another product, another idea, because while people thought it would be nifty, they weren't willing to pay money for it. Okay. So at that point, they divided into 2 groups. Each did the market research for one of the remaining projects, and they evolved the projects, and finally were able to narrow it down. And what they did not select was Matt's idea. Instead they selected this group, what they ended up naming Group. It's an event planning app where the people who are attending the event can help or maybe not plan the whole thing, but they can say, yeah, here's the music I want to play, that sort of thing. Okay, so then they finalized the details. They organized into a development team and a business team. So because they had so many students, they were really able to specialize in some of these roles. Since they didn't want to draw on, say, the part of the university that helps commercialize university's intellectual property, because then the university would own it. Instead, they worked with law students to help get some of this stuff set up. And then they were able to get out to a beta release. We learned from that. So this year, 2021 to 22, we had only 6 students, so they were able to focus a little better. We had them start just 3 projects to look at. Because we were able to move things to the left and plan a little better ahead, we were able to get those meetings lined up at the beginning of the semester. So they were able to move much faster and get to where they had next down to a single product to work on. And so then they were able to move through these milestones very quickly. Awesome things. Students learn the business side of things. Normally, it's only the sponsor who's responsible for the business side of things. Our students are responsible for the technical part of it. Now, the students learn the business part of it, which brings their value to their future employers, great benefit. But you got to pay attention to those IP policies. Like I said, they don't have to form an LLC. Our students chose to, but even if you don't choose to form an LLC, the practice of going through that market research kind of helps you get the sense of, even if this were an open source product, helps you get the sense of, is this valuable? You will get some pushback possibly. One of our students from this year was very unhappy that there was this data-driven decision for making a game, and he really thought it should be an art-driven decision. Maybe at the in-person we can talk about this guy's thesis. Pay attention to the curricular implications. Our students, we asked those first year, in that first year we did the experiment, we asked them, would you have been prepared before your first year of Capstone? They said no. Even though they had that semester-long project with OpenMRS, they said no. We learned much from that first year of Capstone on the technical side, so this year we were able to focus on everything else. Also pay attention to the accreditation considerations for CS and CE majors. Maybe this isn't such a problem from an accreditation reason, but still is a good idea. But if you look in the recommended the curriculum guidelines for software engineering majors, it really strongly encourages you to have a project sponsor other than the faculty supervisor, and presumably then other than the students themselves. But again, the students learned a lot from this. The business side really will benefit them when they go out, when they went out to industry, even though only some of them stuck with the capstone, or stuck with the startup project, because they learned how to balance the technical and business side of things. Team dynamics are key. Our students were primed for success on that front because they worked so closely together already. Got to get them started early. We kind of failed on that front back in their 2020 to 21, but for 21 to 22, we learned that lesson and we got them started sooner. Make failure okay. You got to let them fail if they fail. That shouldn't be surprised. You learn a lot from failure, and you yourself have to step outside of your comfort zone so students know it's okay for them to do so too. So that's a real quick nutshell of what we did. I'd be happy to talk with you more about it, both at the remote conference and at the in-person conference. I look forward to seeing you there.